If you've been married for 30, 40, even 50 years, and you still sometimes wonder, am I truly touching her the way she wants to be touched? You're not alone. In fact, you're far from it. Many men in their 60s, 70s, and 80s are still struggling to dict the ever-evolving mystery of a woman's body. Not because they don't love their partners, not because they aren't trying, but simply because no one ever taught them how, especially as bodies change with age. Let me ask you this. Have you ever felt unsure whether what used to bring her pleasure still does? Or found yourself second-guessing your touch? Wondering if you're missing something subtle but important? If so, you're in the right place. I'm Dr. Mohit Khera, a urologist professor and intimacy researcher. I've spent more than 30 years helping men understand the shifting dynamics of sexuality, connection, and aging. Over the decades, I've worked with thousands of couples, many of whom believed the spark was gone forever, until they discovered what I'm about to share with you today. And here's what might surprise you the most. The places you've been told to focus on for years, like the clitoris, might not even top the list anymore. And even more importantly, there are areas most women over 50 actually wish you'd avoid. Not because they dislike you touching them, but because those areas can become overly sensitive, uncomfortable, or just no longer enjoyable with age. In this video, I'm going to walk you through something deeply important. The 3 places women over 50 want to be touched, and 3 they don't. And more than just listing body parts, I'll help you understand the why behind them so you can rekindle connection, rebuild trust, and maybe even reignite a level of intimacy you thought was long gone. And trust me, you don't want to miss what I'll share at the end. There's one specific zone that's been misunderstood for decades. A place many men think is an instant turn-on, but which many women secretly dread. Understanding this one thing could change your intimate life forever. Before we dive in, if you're someone who cares about staying close emotionally, physically, and sexually as you grow older, consider subscribing to the channel and tapping the bell icon so you don't miss future videos like this. And if this content speaks to you, leave a 1 in the comments. If it doesn't, leave a 0. Your feedback helps shape what I create for you. All right, let's get to what you came here for. Thanks to recent in-depth research involving hundreds of women over 50, we now have a clearer, more compassionate understanding of what really feels good, not just physically, but emotionally too. These insights go beyond technique. They go to the heart of what it means to truly connect. 1. The entrance of the vagina. Yes, you read that right. The entrance, not the inside of the vagina. For many women over 50, this is one of the most sensitive and emotionally charged areas of the body. And it's often overlooked or rushed past on the way to deeper penetration. But here's the truth for a woman who's experienced childbirth. Menopause, hormonal shifts, or even surgery, this area can carry deep emotional memory. It's a place of vulnerability, and when touched with patience and presence, it can become a gateway to deep trust and connection. It's not about pressure. It's not about going fast. It's about being there, slowing down, making eye contact, using a warm palm or the soft pads of your fingers in slow, circular movements, whispering a loving word. These small, tender gestures say more than any grand performance ever could. Think of it this way: when you approach the entrance of the vagina with reverence, you're not just touching skin. You're holding history, emotion, and trust in your hands. It becomes less of a gateway to somewhere else and more of a sacred space in its own right. Many men have been conditioned to believe that passion equals urgency. But as we age, the most powerful kind of intimacy often comes from the opposite: stillness, patience, and attunement. When you touch this area with presence, not expectation, You invite your partner to open emotionally as well as physically. 2. Around the urethral opening. Here's one that even many doctors don't talk about. The small area around the urethral opening just above the vaginal entrance and below the clitoris is one of the most overlooked and underrated pleasure zones on a woman's body. It's subtle, delicate, almost hidden in plain sight. But it holds an astonishing level of sensation, especially when approached gently. I recall a woman in her late 60s who once told me with a half smile, "It's not the place I ever thought to mention. But when my husband lingers there softly, it feels like a quiet kind of electricity. Not explosive, but lingering, like a warm current that hums through my whole body." That description has stayed with me, and I've heard similar versions of it again and again. This area doesn't respond well to intensity or friction. In fact, too much pressure can quickly turn pleasure into discomfort. What works best? Featherlight strokes, the soft tips of your fingers, the warmth of your hand just resting nearby, a slow, spiraling movement, or even just staying there with no agenda, just presence. When done right, it can create a feeling of deep safety and slow-building arousal. Why does this matter so much, especially in later years? Because many women over 50 say they don't want to be revved up like a car engine anymore. They want to feel cherished, seen, met. And when this part of her body is touched with that kind of energy, something almost magical can happen. Stay with me, because the next zone, the third preferred touchpoint, might surprise you even more. Previously, we explored 2 often overlooked places on a woman's body where gentle, intentional touch can create deep emotional and physical connection, especially as we age. Now let's continue with the third, and perhaps most intimate zone of all, one that holds not just physical sensitivity, but emotional depth, trust, and tenderness. Let's talk about the inner vaginal wall specifically, the upper front section, commonly known as the G-spot. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let me say this. The G-spot isn't some magic button or guaranteed path to pleasure. It's more like a conversation, quiet, layered, and meaningful. For many women, especially those in long-term relationships, this area represents something more than just arousal. It represents vulnerability and trust. The skin here is softer. The tissue is spongy, almost cushion-like, and when it's approached with care, not force, not urgency, it responds not just with physical pleasure, but with a deep sense of being understood. For some women, this spot carries decades of emotional memory. It's where they've felt both overwhelmed and unseen, or, finally, cherished. Let me share a story. A couple in their early 70s came to my office. They'd been married for over 45 years and were afraid they had lost the spark. The husband, a kind and thoughtful man, said he still loved his wife dearly but didn't know how to reach her physically or emotionally anymore. When I asked the wife what she truly desired in their intimate moments, her response was quiet but clear. "I don't want deep or fast. I just want to feel held." She spoke of how her favorite kind of touch wasn't rushed or repetitive, but slow and steady, like a tide rolling in. When he presses gently on that spot, "It's not about orgasm," she said. "It's like a warm wave that starts inside me and softens everything." My breath slows. My shoulders relax. I feel seen. That spot she was talking about. The upper front wall of the vagina, about an inch or 2 inside, just under the belly button when lying down. When touched gently, rhythmically, not with thrusting or digging, it can become a bridge. A bridge from the body to the heart. This kind of intimacy is not flashy. It won't be found in adult films or mainstream media. But for older couples, especially those navigating the shifts that come with menopause illness or emotional distance, it can mean everything. It says, I still want to know you. I'm learning your body again and again with love. Now many men ask me, how do I know if I'm touching the right place? My answer: you'll know, not because she says so, though that might happen too, but because of how her body responds. Look for the subtleties, the softening of her abdomen, the deepening of her breath, the way her legs open just a little more inviting rather than resisting. These aren't fireworks. They're whispers. But sometimes the whispers are where the real connection lives. And that brings us to an essential truth. Just as there are places that warmly invite touch, there are others that quietly, even painfully reject it. And learning to recognize and respect these areas, that's what earns a woman's deepest trust. Let's shift the focus now from where to touch to where not to touch. Because even if you've been with your partner for decades, there are parts of her body that may not feel good to her anymore, physically, emotionally, or both. And surprisingly, these aren't always the places you'd expect. Let's explore the 3 areas women most often don't want touched, and why knowing this can actually bring you closer than ever before. 1. The anus. Now, this may come as a shock, especially given how casually certain forms of media talk about this area as just another erogenous zone. But for many women over 50, the anus is not a source of curiosity or excitement. It's a source of discomfort or even anxiety. According to one of the largest studies on female sexual experience in older age, the anus was the #1 place women said they did not want to be touched during intimacy. And the reasons they weren't just about physical discomfort. They ran deeper into emotional territory. Some women described feeling invaded or caught off guard when touched there. Others associated it with shame or trauma from earlier in life, or with medical issues that made the area physically sensitive or off-limits. One woman in her late 60s said it best: "It's not that I don't love my husband. I just wish he'd notice the way my body pulls away, instead of assuming it's okay." And that's the key assumption. We often assume that if we've done something before or seen it in media, it must be acceptable. But when it comes to real, lasting intimacy, assumptions can break trust. Here's the truth if you're unsure. Ask gently, respectfully, without pressure. And if her answer is no, whether it's whispered or firm, that's the end of the conversation. Because when a woman feels that her no is heard and honored, she feels safe. And when she feels safe, her body and heart can open in ways you never imagined. Intimacy isn't about pushing limits, it's about honoring boundaries. And that kind of safety, it's the foundation of everything else. 2. The cervix. This next one surprises a lot of men, especially those who've been told that deeper is better. But for many women, especially as they age, the cervix is not a source of pleasure. It's actually one of the most off-limits places in their bodies. Now, anatomically, the cervix sits at the far end of the vaginal canal. Some men believe that if they reach it, they're doing something right or intense. But in reality, many women feel discomfort or even sharp pain when this area is touched directly. It's not about technique, it's about misunderstanding. The cervix isn't designed for frequent stimulation. In fact, for many women, especially post-menopausal women, this area becomes even more sensitive. Hormonal changes can lead to thinning of the tissues, dryness, and reduced flexibility. What may have felt neutral or even mildly stimulating in younger years can become a source of pain later in life. But beyond the physical, there's an emotional component too. One woman shared with me, "It's not just that it hurts. It feels like he's not paying attention to what I need. Like he's doing something he thinks I want, instead of asking me what I actually feel." That kind of emotional disconnection can leave a woman feeling unseen, even in the most intimate of moments. So what's the takeaway here? Slow down, pay attention, and don't assume that deeper equals better. Real intimacy comes not from how far you go, but from how present you are. The cervix is not a destination, and if you let go of that idea, you might find yourselves more connected than ever before. Next up, we'll uncover the third area most women quietly wish their partners would avoid, and it might just be the most surprising one yet. Because sometimes even what looks like affection on the outside can feel like pressure on the inside. Stick with me. You won't want to miss this part. Earlier we explored how deeper isn't always better, especially when it comes to the cervix. We talked about how this delicate area, particularly after menopause or childbirth, can be more sensitive than ever, and how honoring that vulnerability can strengthen trust. Now let's go a little deeper, not into the body, but into the heart of what it means to be fully present with the person you love. Because often the discomfort isn't just physical, it's emotional too. Let's begin where we left off, that tender, protective area at the very end of the vaginal canal. For many women, this is not just anatomy. It's a guarded space, one that when touched too roughly or unexpectedly can instantly trigger discomfort or even pain. The kind that's hard to explain in the moment. It's not sharp or alarming, but it pulls her away from connection. It makes her brace. Especially for women who've gone through menopause, had children, or experienced gynecological conditions, this area can become significantly more sensitive over time. What may have once been neutral or even pleasurable can now feel like a place to avoid. I remember a conversation with a woman in her early 70s. She spoke gently, almost apologetically, about how every time her husband tried to go as deep as he could, she found herself tightening not in fear, but in preparation. She didn't know how to tell him. She didn't want to embarrass him or damage his confidence. So she stayed quiet and endured. But what she was really wishing silently, achingly, was that he would just slow down. That he would notice her body pulling away and pause. That he would ask, not assume. This is where performance steps aside and presence takes its place. Because for many women, what they're longing for is not more intensity, but more attentiveness. And it can be so simple. A slower rhythm, shallower depth, a quiet check-in. Is this okay? Not asked out of worry, but from a place of care. Those little moments of attention, they can change everything. For a man in his 60s or 70s trying to rebuild connection, this is powerful. Understanding where not to go can be just as important as knowing where to touch. And when you honor those limits, something else opens up in its place: emotional safety. Trust. True connection. And now we come to the third place, one that might genuinely surprise you. Because this next area, it's one most men reach for without hesitation. It's often seen as a natural part of foreplay, but for many women, especially as they age, it has become too much. Let's talk about the nipples. Yes, the nipples. For decades, we've heard that this is one of the most erotic zones on a woman's body, and for many women, it absolutely can be. But here's the part that often goes unspoken for women over 50 or 60. This area can become more uncomfortable than pleasurable. Why hormonal shifts, especially those following menopause, can significantly increase the sensitivity of breast tissue. What once sparked arousal can now feel overwhelming, even painful, especially when touched without warning or with too much pressure. And yet so many men go straight there, automatically, instinctively thinking it's a safe, surefire move. But bodies change, and what once worked might not anymore. I remember a woman in her late 60s telling me this during a quiet session. Her words were tender but heavy with truth. "I love that my husband still desires me," she said. "But sometimes when he reaches for my chest without saying anything, I wish he'd just pause. Just look at me and ask. It makes me feel like a whole person again, not just someone's body." That moment stayed with me. Because it's not about avoiding this area entirely. It's about how you approach it. The nipples are incredibly responsive, and that sensitivity can fluctuate dramatically, depending on age, hormones, medication, and emotional state. Some days a gentle touch may feel warm and intimate. Other days it might feel like too much, too soon, too intense. The tricky part is there's no way to predict. That's why the key isn't just technique, it's presence. Pay attention to her breathing, her posture, her stillness or her movement. Or simply ask in a soft voice, "How does this feel tonight?" Not every time, but often enough that she knows you're still listening. Because when you show her that level of care, you're not just touching her skin, you're touching her heart. You're saying, "I still want to know you. I'm still learning you. I haven't stopped being curious about how to love you." That kind of touch, that kind of attention, it builds something rare, a deeper kind of intimacy, one that isn't based on repetition, but on rediscovery. And if you've been wondering how all of this fits into your bigger story as a man who still wants to feel connected, needed, and desired, then stay with me. Because what I'm about to share next could shift how you see yourself in this next powerful chapter of life. A reminder for men who still want connection. If you're still watching, still listening closely, it tells me something meaningful about you. You're not here for quick fixes or flashy tricks. You're here because you care. About closeness, about emotional presence, about showing up not just in body but in spirit. And if no one has said this to you lately, let me say it now that matters. You matter. The fact that you're still willing to learn, still open to change, still eager to love more gently with age. That's not weakness. That's strength. So many men in their 60s, 70s, even 80s have come to me asking, is it too late? Maybe their bodies have changed. Maybe they've drifted from their partner. Maybe they've been holding on to old patterns that no longer work, and now they're not sure how to start again. Here's what I always tell them, and what I want to tell you right now. It's never too late. Not to reconnect. Not to rediscover. Not just with your partner, but with the part of yourself that still wants to care, to explore, to give. Intimacy at this stage of life looks different. It's not about performance. It's about presence. It's about making her feel safe, seen, and deeply valued, not just for her body, but for her story, her heart, her whole self. And when you lead with that kind of intention, something beautiful begins to shift. She starts to relax. She starts to lean in. Walls soften. Eyes linger. Trust returns. And from that trust, true intimacy is born again. So don't give up. Don't assume the best days are behind you. Sometimes the richest chapters in love don't come at the start, but in the quiet, steady years that follow. And as we wrap up, there's one last message I want to leave you with. Something simple but powerful enough to change the way you love from this moment on.